Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. He captured an alien princess with his trap. The girl was afraid he would eat her, but he didn't. Declan had never expected to catch anything more dangerous than a wild boar or a particularly feisty raccoon. Yet, as the ropes of his trap snapped tight, and he heard the telltale sound of something, or rather someone, struggling against the tangled mess of his homemade snares, he had to rethink his entire understanding of the word wild. He approached the tangled mess cautiously, gripping the small, improvised spear he had been using for hunting. It was more of a walking stick with an awkward point than a real weapon, but it made him feel better. And honestly, it didn't look like whatever was caught in his trap was much of a threat anyway. Then he saw it. A pair of silver-blue ears, long and sharp, poked out from beneath the bushes, followed by a face that seemed to glow in the dim moonlight. Her skin shimmered faintly, almost translucent, and her eyes, violet, impossibly vivid, were wide with panic. She thrashed against the ropes in a way that suggested more grace than power, as if she were a dancer trapped in the wrong performance. The human brain, Declan's included, isn't exactly built to process aliens casually, so for a few seconds, he just stood there, mouth slightly agape. She was obviously not a bear, and definitely not a raccoon. He was pretty sure that much. "What?" he muttered, barely aware that he was talking out loud. You're not supposed to be here." The alien woman, if she could even be called that, gaped at him like he'd just sprouted a second head. Her lips parted, and for a moment, Declan thought she might speak. But no words came out, just a low, guttural growl. She looked at him like he was a thing she should be running from, which, honestly, wasn't unreasonable. He was a strange, unshaven man holding a stick and looking at her like he had no idea how to process what was happening. "Oh, great. You're probably some sort of diplomat, and I've just ruined your royal escape or something," he said to himself, sighing. He knelt down awkwardly beside her, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible, though how he was supposed to do that with spear in hand, he had no idea. Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to, eat you. That's not really my thing," he said, more to reassure himself than her. The alien blinked at him, her violet eyes wide, her breath shallow and quick. Clearly, she wasn't buying his "I'm harmless" routine. To be fair, he hadn't been very convincing so far. Still, as absurd as the situation was, Declan couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. She looked terrified, and not just the regular sort of, "Oh my God, I'm trapped in some random human's weird backyard" fear. No, this was something deeper. Like she feared he might do something far worse than just a few weeks of awkward small talk. "Look, I don't know who you are, but I'm not really interested in, eating anyone," he said. The more he talked, the more he realized how ridiculous it sounded. The alien stared at him, still clearly on edge, but there was a flicker of something else, confusion, a shift in her posture, as if she realized he was speaking the truth, or at least, he was too awkward to be a threat. "I don't suppose you could help me out of this mess, could you?" she asked finally, her voice a melodic blend of calm and dread. The words were in a language he didn't understand, but the tone made it clear she wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. "I'm sorry. Did you just speak English?" Declan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. The alien gave him a look that suggested she was considering if it was worth answering him at all. Finally, she muttered something in a language he recognized only because it sounded like the oddest variation of Draxan he had ever heard. The Draxan were an ancient alien species, known for their glowing skin and long, pointed ears. He'd read about them in some obscure article online, but there was no way he could understand what she was saying. I think we've got a bit of a communication issue, he said with a half-grin. "I'm Declan, by the way. Just trying to survive out here." Her eyes narrowed, and she wriggled in the trap a little more aggressively, as if preparing to flee. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice growing steadier despite the circumstances. "Princess Lyra of Draxan." Declan blinked. "Princess," he repeated, trying not to laugh. "It wasn't every day you captured royalty in your makeshift trap." "Well, that's a bit of a plot twist." "I am not joking, human," she growled, her teeth flashing as she struggled again. "You must let me go, or you will regret it." Now, Declan knew enough about royalty to understand that when someone threatened you with vague, ominous consequences, it was probably time to reconsider your options. But he didn't feel all that worried. Besides, it wasn't like he could just leave her out there to starve or something. Look, I'll let you go. But first, maybe you can help me figure out how to keep my traps from catching things that aren't bears. Lyra looked at him, clearly not convinced, but with no better option. She held still as he carefully started to untangle the ropes. "You're not going to eat me, then?" she asked, still eyeing him warily. Declan snorted. "I mean, have you seen what I eat? Mostly beans and whatever I can scrounge up. Not exactly gourmet cuisine. Besides, I'm pretty sure I'm not the one who should be worried here." Lyra blinked at him. "I'm the one who should be worried?" she asked, incredulous. "Yeah, I'm harmless. But you, well, I don't know what kind of mess you're in, but I'm pretty sure it's something bigger than me, right?" Lyra hesitated. Then, to Declan's surprise, she laughed, albeit a nervous, strained laugh. "Maybe you're right, human. Maybe you're not as dangerous as I thought." Declan grinned. "You have no idea how many people say that about me. The whole unassuming, harmless survivalist routine works wonders." He stood up, brushing dirt off his pants as he extended a hand. "So, no hard feelings, right?" Lyra eyed his hand warily, but after a moment, she took it. "I suppose not." Declan chuckled. "I'm still not entirely sure how you ended up in my trap, but you're not the first unexpected guest I've had." "You won't eat me, though?" she asked again, almost cautiously. Declan grinned. "As long as you promise not to eat me, we're golden." Lyra's violet eyes flickered with what might have been amusement, or maybe just disbelief that someone like Declan existed. Either way, it was the first time since she'd landed on Earth that she didn't feel like a walking target. "Well then, I suppose I'm stuck with you for the moment, human." Declan shrugged. "Hey, if you need a tour guide to the wonders of beans and sleeping on the floor, I'm your guy." As Lyra rolled her eyes, Declan couldn't help but feel like, despite everything, this was the beginning of something unusual. Declan wasn't sure how it had come to this, but there he was, standing in his makeshift kitchen, stirring a pot of something that could technically be called soup, though the term was used generously. Lyra sat across from him at the small table, her violet eyes scrutinizing everything in the room with an intensity that could only be described as judgmental. It didn't matter that he'd cleared out the dust bunnies and rearranged the mismatched furniture to make the place look slightly more presentable. Lyra wasn't here to admire his home decor. She was here because she had nowhere else to go, unless she was planning to take over the world or something, which was entirely possible, considering her royalty. "So, what's the deal with your ship?" Declan asked casually as he ladled the soup into a bowl. "Is it still working, or do you need to get back to space or whatever?" Lyra shot him a glance, but it was more wary than it should have been. "I've been meaning to get to it," she said, her voice thick with the weight of someone who'd been raised to never admit anything was broken. "It's not exactly designed for emergency landings, or for anyone to find it, for that matter." "So it's a one-way ticket to nowhere, huh?" Declan asked, his grin widening. "Not sure that's exactly how you want your royal escape to go, is it?" "I am not escaping. I am handling a matter of great importance," she said, though she didn't sound all that convincing. "This escape, as you call it, is merely a temporary measure." "Sure," Declan said with a mock-sympathetic nod. "Temporary measures, like, eating my soup. I'm sure intergalactic royalty like you could afford something a little more extravagant than, well, whatever this is." She eyed the pot suspiciously, her silver-blue ears twitching. "What is this food?" "Ah, now we come to the real question," Declan said with a playful grin. "It's soup. A very special kind of soup. You might have heard of it. It's called survival stew. A classic dish from the I'm Too Lazy to Cook cookbook. It's all I can afford, really." Lyra stared at the soup as if it were about to sprout tentacles and attack her. "You eat this regularly?" "Well, I don't eat it so much as I consume it in a desperate attempt to sustain my existence on this forsaken planet," Declan said, then pointed his spoon at her. "But hey, don't knock it until you try it. Trust me, once you taste it, you'll never want to leave." That is unlikely, she said flatly, clearly unconvinced. Declan chuckled and took a spoonful himself. What can I say? It's an acquired taste. Lyra regarded him with a mixture of skepticism and horror. I have had the finest delicacies Draxon has to offer. This is not one of them. Well, it's not exactly from Draxon, is it? Declan said, grinning. But hey, I'm sure your royal chefs would be so impressed by this delightful mess. She didn't respond, her focus still on the soup like it might bite her if she wasn't careful. So about that ship of yours, Declan said, changing the subject. How badly is it busted? Do you need to go back to space or something? Lyra's lips pressed together into a thin line. It's not just busted, she said, her tone growing more serious. It's stranded. It's a prototype. One of a kind. I would have left by now, but... She trailed off, looking out the window as though the answer was written in the stars. Declan raised an eyebrow. One of a kind, huh? Sounds fancy. Oh, it is, she said with a touch of pride. It's a stealth ship. Hard to track, faster than most, and has a cloaking device. But, she sighed, it's not exactly designed to land gracefully. It doesn't land so much as it crashes. Well, that's reassuring, Declan said dryly. Is it at least in one piece? Or is it scattered across the forest like a lost puzzle? Lyra's expression turned grim. More like the latter. Declan laughed. Perfect. And here I was thinking I was the one who was a disaster. Her eyes softened for a moment, and she lowered her gaze. You're not a disaster, Declan. You're unusual, but not a disaster. Declan was about to respond, but his stomach growled loudly, interrupting the moment. Lyra's eyes flicked to the noise, and for a moment, there was something that almost looked like amusement in her expression. That's your stomach? She asked, raising an eyebrow. I'm not exactly a gourmet chef, am I? Declan grinned. Just give me a few minutes, and I'll see if I can't cook up something a little less daring than this soup. Lyra looked at him for a long moment before shaking her head. You are a strange human. Do you always make light of things? Declan shrugged, his grin widening. It's kind of my thing. You gotta laugh, or else you're just stuck with the miserable side of life. Lyra studied him for a moment, her violet eyes narrow with thought. Maybe you're right, but I think there's more to you than this humor. You seem, well, for someone who lives alone in the wilderness, you're surprisingly easy to talk to. Declan raised an eyebrow. Well, when you're stuck with your own company for long enough, you start talking to yourself. But hey, if it helps, I'm good at listening. She snorted, her lips twitching in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Perhaps you're more useful than I thought. Declan put his spoon down with a flourish. And there it is. A compliment. It took me all of 5 minutes to win you over. I'm like the master of diplomacy. Lyra rolled her eyes. If you can't talk your way out of a problem, then you're not truly human. Well, then you're in good hands, princess, Declan said with a wink. I'm the problem solver around here. She gave him a sidelong glance. You know, I don't think I've ever met anyone like you. I get that a lot, Declan said, taking a mock bow. It's a gift. Lyra smiled faintly, and for a moment, Declan wondered if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one who was starting to get used to the situation. Just as Declan was about to continue his impromptu comedy routine, a shrill beat broke the moment, followed by a series of rapid clicks from the direction of the workbench. Hold on, Declan said, getting up quickly. He fiddled with the control panel of his hastily assembled communications device, which had only recently started making noises. Let's see what this thing is trying to tell me. Lyra stood, eyes narrowed. You built this yourself? Not exactly. It's mostly stuff I found in the junkyard, Declan muttered, glancing at her. I have no idea if it'll work, but I've got a theory. I think it's trying to communicate with something, somewhere. The beeping grew more intense. Lyra's eyes flared. Something's responding, she said quietly, her tone suddenly alert. That's not a human signal. Declan frowned. What do you mean? She glanced at him with a look that said it all. It's your royal family, Declan. They're here. Declan froze, his hand still hovering over the control panel, fingers tingling with an odd mixture of fear and curiosity. The beeping from the device had intensified, a series of rapid, irregular clicks now filling the small cabin like an eerie warning. His eyes shot over to Lyra, who stood with her arms crossed, her violet eyes glowing with a mix of alarm and something else. Was it excitement? Her expression was unreadable as she stepped forward, her long silver-blue ears twitching with each new series of clicks. "That signal," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "It's too organized to be random. Someone's sending a message." Declan squinted at the screen. "Well, someone is certainly enthusiastic about it. But who?" Lyra's gaze flickered to him, and for the first time, he saw a hint of something that looked a lot like panic. "I told you my ship wasn't designed for subtlety." Her voice was quiet, tight with tension. "The Draxen don't miss an opportunity to find one of their own, and they don't give up easily." "Yeah, I'm starting to get that," Declan muttered, still looking at the screen as the beeping morphed into a series of tones that sounded remarkably like a coded message. "So, this family of yours, are they the type to just show up uninvited?" "They don't show up," she snapped. "They arrive, in force, and they'll have tracked my ship's signature by now. There's no escaping that." "Ah," Declan said with a half-grin. "So no pressure then." Lyra didn't even seem to hear him. Her gaze was locked on the device, her posture stiff, her eyes narrowing as she processed the information. "This is bad," she whispered, almost to herself. Declan rubbed his temple, trying to keep the panic from creeping into his voice. Okay. So, let me get this straight. Your royal family is about to drop in, and they're not the let's have tea and discuss intergalactic politics type, right?" "Right," Lyra answered, her tone flat. "More like the let's drag you back to Draxen and pretend your escape never happened type." "Great. Just the vibe I was hoping for," Declan said dryly, then muttered to himself, "I should have just stuck with the raccoons." Lyra shot him a sharp look, but it was a brief flicker before she turned back to the device, her fingers hovering over the buttons. "I need to send a response." "Isn't that dangerous?" Declan asked, glancing at the panel. "I mean, shouldn't we be doing the opposite? Hiding or running or—" "There's no point in hiding anymore." She spun on him, her face hardening with resolve. "If they're already tracking me, running would only make it worse. We're going to have to face this head-on." Declan scratched the back of his head. "Well, that's one way to do it. You know, normally when I have a problem, I try talking to it first. If that fails, I'd maybe try running. But you're the princess, so I'll defer to you." Lyra glanced at him, a fleeting moment of amusement crossing her face before she refocused. She worked quickly, fingers moving over the console with a practiced precision he hadn't expected. "I'll send a message to them. It's the only way to buy us some time. Maybe even throw them off the trail long enough for us to make a plan." "Let me guess," Declan said. "You're going to use your royal charm to get them to play nice?" "Something like that," Lyra said, not looking up as her fingers danced across the buttons. "Except I'm going to pretend I'm still on Draxen, not stranded on a primitive planet." "That'll definitely be convincing," Declan said sarcastically. "Do you have a super-duper royal diplomat button on that thing, or should I start planning my escape route?" "There's no time for that," she said, her voice taking on an edge of urgency. "Just stay quiet and let me handle it." Declan crossed his arms, looking at her. "Okay, but if I'm about to get arrested by space cops, at least tell me we're going to make a run for it first. I've got a really great hideout spot near the old sawmill, but I'll need about 30 minutes to get the boat ready." Lyra paused mid-typing, looking up at him. Her eyes softened, just a fraction. "If I'm wrong, and they find us, I'll make sure we escape. But I can't guarantee your boat will be fast enough." "Fair enough," Declan said, trying to sound casual. "You just let me know when the space cops get here, and I'll put my running shoes on." Her lips quirked into the faintest of smiles, and for a second, Declan thought she might actually laugh. But then she turned back to the device, her focus returning. The beeping had slowed to a steady rhythm, like a countdown. "I'm sending it now," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. There. That should keep them occupied for a while. I've given them a false signal. If they follow it, they'll end up in the wrong quadrant. At least for now. Declan nodded, impressed despite himself. You're good at this. I thought royalty was all about wearing fancy clothes and giving speeches, but you're a tech wizard too. Lyra glanced at him, her gaze flicking to the faintest hint of a smile. Not exactly, she said, but when you're raised to navigate politics, you learn how to manipulate situations, including signals. Well, I'm glad you're on my team, Declan said. So what's next? Do we go get coffee and wait for the rescue ship? Lyra raised an eyebrow, her smile tightening slightly. There's no rescue coming, but we can plan for a way out, if you have any ideas. Declan put his hands on his hips, thinking, all right, let's break this down. First, they think you're on Draxon. So, we make sure they think that for as long as possible. Second, we need a decoy. A decoy, Lyra repeated, sounding skeptical. Yeah, Declan said, grinning. I've got an idea. I've been tinkering with some old communication tech I found in the junkyard. If we hook it up to your ship's signal emitter, we can create a fake transmission. They'll think we're still heading in the opposite direction. Lyra stared at him, clearly not convinced. And how do you propose we tinker with a ship that's mostly scattered across the forest? I've got a drone, Declan said, tapping his finger to his temple. Remember the junkyard part? It's a little beat up, but it can fly. We send it out to scout, make a fake trail, and hope to confuse the Draxon long enough to give us a head start. Lyra tilted her head, considering it. That could work, if we're lucky. We're definitely not going to get a better shot than this, Declan said with a grin. And lucky is what we're going with. Lyra crossed her arms, a determined look settling on her face. Fine, but if we get caught, I'm blaming you. Deal, Declan said. You can blame me while we're running. But for now, I think we should focus on getting this thing off the ground. Lyra gave him a look that suggested she was still unsure, but the faintest of smiles tugged at her lips. You are an odd human, Declan, but I think I'm starting to understand why you're still alive out here. Hey, surviving is what I do best, he said with a wink. Now, let's get that drone ready to confuse some space cops. The plan was simple, or at least, it seemed simple in Declan's mind. Get the drone working, make a fake signal, and confuse the Draxon forces long enough for them to think they were on the wrong trail. They would have to be fast. They would have to be clever. And most importantly, they would have to pretend that everything was fine, even if it wasn't. Declan didn't like the pretend part. He was already crouched in front of his workbench, picking through the pile of spare parts with a sort of enthusiasm that only a junkyard enthusiast could muster. A couple of old data chips, a few wiring conduits, and a broken-up communicator were spread across the table. He'd built the first prototype drone with little more than scraps from the wreckage of an old transport shuttle. But this second one? This one needed to be perfect. Lyra was watching him, leaning against the wall with her arms folded. Her gaze flickered between the pieces on the table and him. You seem focused, she observed, her voice light, but laced with something that almost resembled amusement. Focused. Please, Declan said with a smirk, not looking up. I'm always focused. This is what I do. I'm basically a walking tech wizard, just a little more rugged and, dashing than your average scientist. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Are you always this confident? Only when I'm fixing things that are about to be used to save my life and yours, he said, his grin widening. No big deal. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, her gaze lingered on the parts in front of him, her eyes narrowing in a way that told him she was trying to make sense of the situation. You realize that we could still be found, right? She asked, the words quieter now, a little more serious. This is just a temporary solution. Declan stopped for a second and looked at her. For a moment, there was something in her eyes, a hesitation he hadn't seen before. Yeah, I know, he said, straightening up. But what's the alternative? Sit here and wait for your family to drop by for dinner? I don't know about you, but I'm not fond of being taken anywhere. Lyra's lips twitched, but she held her ground. Fine. But once they find us, you'll be responsible for keeping me alive. She paused, her gaze drifting to the window. I won't let them take me back. Declan felt a strange sense of resolve rise within him. He hadn't really thought about the fact that, if this failed, Lyra might actually be taken back to Draxon. It wasn't just a royal kidnapping situation. It was a matter of her freedom. Her entire future was at stake. He returned his focus to the drone. It'll work. Trust me. I've been in worse situations. Lyra raised an eyebrow. You've been in worse situations? Or you've caused worse situations? Declan paused, considering. Both, actually. But that's beside the point. Now, let's get this thing flying. After what felt like an eternity of wiring, adjusting, and fine-tuning, Declan finally stepped back, wiping his hands on his worn-out pants. The drone, though looking a little worse for wear, sat there in the middle of the table. It was compact, no bigger than a large cat, with thin, sleek wings that looked like they belonged to something far more advanced than anything Declan had seen before. Is it supposed to look like that? Lyra asked, her voice betraying her curiosity. Declan shot her a grin. Of course it is. This is what happens when you let someone with imagination build things. Now, let's see if it actually works. He grabbed a small remote from the table and flicked the power switch. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the drone's wings began to twitch and flap. It hovered slightly off the table, a metallic chirp sounding from its internal speakers as it buzzed. Lyra raised an eyebrow. That's not as impressive as I thought it would be. Hey, this thing's got heart, Declan said, puffing out his chest. It's got personality. Just wait. I'll show you what it can really do. With a tap of his finger on the remote, the drone zipped into the air, darting around the cabin in a blur of speed and agility. It weaved between the furniture with precision, flying through the narrow space with an ease that made Declan feel like a proud father watching his child perform a trick. He grinned and gave it a little nod. Not bad, huh? Lyra watched the drone's acrobatics, her expression softening. It's impressive, but does it have the range we need? Declan's smile faltered. Well, that's the tricky part. We'll have to test it, but we don't have time to play with it all day. Lyra nodded, her expression hardening again. Then let's get it out there. Declan moved to the back door of the cabin, peering out into the dense woods. A few patches of sunlight filtered through the trees, but the forest was mostly shrouded in shadow. Perfect for a little stealth operation. He grabbed a small tracking device, attached it to the drone's undercarriage, and then handed the remote to Lyra. You're up. Lyra looked at him skeptically. I don't know how to fly this thing. Declan's grin returned, a bit wider this time. It's like riding a bike. Except the bike is a drone, and it doesn't have wheels, and it's flying through the air instead of, on the ground. Lyra rolled her eyes. I'll take that as a very detailed explanation. Trust me, Declan said, his voice taking on a more serious note. Just keep it steady, make sure it doesn't crash, and send it out toward the north. I'll keep an eye on the tracking signal. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding and taking the remote. She stepped outside, her silhouette framed by the fading sunlight as she launched the drone into the air. It zipped upward, darting into the trees, its tiny lights blinking in the twilight. Declan turned his attention to the tracking device, watching as the little blip on the screen began to move steadily northward. His heart beat a little faster as the drone glided further into the woods. The signal was working. He looked over at Lyra, who was watching the drone's path with an intensity that matched his own. It's going well, he said, a grin tugging at his lips. Just keep her flying straight. We don't need any unnecessary detours. Lyra gave him a sideways glance. I'm not a pilot, Declan. Don't expect any miracles. I'm not expecting miracles, Declan replied, smirking. Just have decent flying. The drone disappeared into the trees, the beeping of the tracking device growing fainter. Declan's eyes never left the screen, heart pounding as the blip continued its slow, steady journey. If the Draxon forces followed the signal, they'd be led on a wild goose chase in the wrong direction, leaving them time to breathe, time to escape, time to get the hell out of here. For a moment, He let himself believe that it was working. Then the beeping stopped. The screen blinked a series of warnings. Declan's blood ran cold. No, 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 he muttered, tapping the device. Not now. Lyra's voice broke the silence, calm but with an edge of urgency. What's wrong? Declan stared at the flashing red lights, dread crawling up his spine. The Draxon, they've already seen it. The beeping from Declan's tracker grew louder, a frantic pulse that echoed in the cramped cabin, mirroring the racing beat of his heart. His hand hovered over the device, but no matter how many times he swiped the screen, the red warnings wouldn't go away. The drone's signal had been intercepted, rerouted, and now they were out of time. Lyra stepped closer, her face unreadable. What's happening? The Draxon found the decoy, Declan muttered, his fingers tapping against the device, trying to reset it, hoping, no, praying, for some miracle. But the blip on the screen remained locked in place, a steady, terrifying signal of their discovery. So they're here. Lyra's voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension in it. How long before they reach us? Declan swallowed. I'd say not long. Maybe an hour, maybe less. Then we don't have time to play games, she said sharply, the usual regal composure in her voice replaced by something that bordered on urgency. We need to move now. Right, Declan muttered, pacing for a moment before turning to her. But we don't have a way out. Your ship's in pieces. My boat is, well, let's just say it's not spaceship ready. He shot her a grin, but it lacked its usual confidence. We need a plan, and we need it fast. Lyra's eyes flickered, then narrowed. No, you're right, but we're not out of options. Not yet. Declan looked at her, eyebrow raised. You got something up your sleeve, princess? Lyra smirked, but it was tight, almost resigned. Actually, I do. My ship isn't entirely broken. The core's intact, and with the right adjustments, I could get it working again. Enough to get us off this planet at least. Declan blinked, his mouth dry. Okay, that sounds like exactly what we need. He looked back at the tracker. The signal was getting closer. How much time do we have to fix it? Not long. She met his gaze with a fierce intensity. But I can do it. The only problem is, I'll need help. You're good with technology. Are you willing to actually be helpful for once? Declan's lips curled into a grin. Now you're speaking my language. He stepped forward, rolling up his sleeves. Lead the way, princess. The two of them quickly moved into action. Declan helped her drag the broken remnants of the ship to a nearby clearing, his eyes constantly flicking to the sky. The tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The faint hum of distant engines could already be heard. Lyra was right, they didn't have long. As they worked, Declan couldn't help but notice the shift in her demeanor. There was no more hesitation in her movements, no more trace of the frightened princess who had stumbled into his life a few days ago. She was fully in control, confident. She had become the leader she was born to be, and Declan couldn't help but admire her. In that moment, he realized that this wasn't just about saving her. She was saving him, too. Okay, that's the last stabilizer in place, Lyra said, standing back and wiping her hands on her pants. Now, you just have to work your magic on the power converter. Declan took one last look at the approaching Draxon ships. His chest tightened. Magic, huh? Let's hope I can pull some out of my hat. He knelt by the power converter, digging into the wiring with practiced ease. It's going to take a few minutes, but I'll make it work. Trust me. Lyra didn't speak for a moment. When she did, her voice was quieter than usual. I do trust you. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Declan didn't know what to say in response. He had never expected this, never imagined that, after everything, he would find himself standing side by side with someone who had once seemed like a world apart from him. But here they were, and for better or worse, he knew that their fates were now tied together. There was no turning back. Declan worked quickly, his hands moving faster than his mind could keep up with. The Draxon were closing in, their ships darting across the sky, casting long shadows over the clearing. He could hear their engines now, the faint hum of their hyperdrives vibrating through the air. His heart raced, but he pushed the fear down. He couldn't afford to panic, not now. With a final twist of the wrench, the power converter clicked into place. Declan took a step back, wiping sweat from his brow. The ship was now almost ready. All it needed was a little more juice to get the engines firing. Lyra stepped up beside him, glancing at the distant ships and then back at him. "Can you make it work?" Declan flashed her a grin. "It's either that, or we start running. And I don't know about you, but I'm really not in the mood for a foot race with space soldiers." Lyra gave him a tight smile. "Then let's get this show on the road." He jumped into the cockpit, his hands flying over the controls. With a few deft movements, he bypassed the damaged systems, rerouted power, and finally, after a heart-stopping moment, the engines hummed to life. "Here we go," Declan muttered, flicking a series of switches. The ship's hull rumbled beneath him, and the ship slowly lifted off the ground, the whine of the engines filling the air. Lyra grabbed onto the nearest seat, her grip tight as the ship shuddered and descended. "This better not be another one of your close calls, Declan." He grinned. "I'm getting really good at those, aren't I?" But his grin faded as he looked at the tracking device. The Draxan ships were almost upon them. They would be too close to outrun, even with the boost from the ship's engines. They needed a plan, and fast. "Declan," Lyra said, her voice steady but laced with tension. "Do you trust me?" "Of course," he said, his heart hammering in his chest. Lyra's eyes met his, fierce and determined. "Good, because I have one last trick up my sleeve. Hold on tight." Before Declan could ask what she meant, she slammed a button on her side of the control panel, and the ship suddenly shifted. The stars outside the viewports flickered as the ship bent space itself, the light bending and warping around them. The ship's speed increased exponentially, pulling them into a high-speed slipstream that bent the fabric of space and time. Declan's breath caught as the world around them twisted into a blur. The Draxan ships behind them faltered, unable to match the sudden acceleration. He barely had time to process what was happening before the stars ahead cleared into the familiar expanse of deep space. They had broken through the Draxan blockade. The ship shuddered, but it held together. Lyra let out a quiet exhale, and Declan laughed, a nervous but relieved chuckle. "Okay, that was way cooler than I expected." Lyra glanced at him, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. "Next time, I'll show you how to make it look easy." He sat back, taking in the quiet after the storm. The Draxan were left far behind, and the ship was now gliding through the calm of deep space. There was a strange peace in the air, one that Declan hadn't expected to feel. "Where do we go from here?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Lyra turned her gaze to the stars outside, her expression thoughtful. "We go wherever we need to. But this time, Declan," she said, her tone lighter, "we're going on our terms." He smiled, leaning back in his seat. "Yeah, I like the sound of that." The stars stretched before them, endless and filled with possibility. And in that moment, Declan realized something important. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, and with Lyra at his side, anything seemed possible. The end.